Când lucrurile par complicate, nu te îngrijora.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We will start the panel immediately.
Prețuim trecut.
Well, hello everyone, and greetings, please. Yes, greetings to everyone who's watching this on the live stream. Thank you for making your way back from the break so promptly. I'm very pleased to be joined physically on the panel by Mr. Titus CORLÂNșTEAN, who's the chairman of the Committee for Foreign Affairs in the Senate of the Parliament of Romania, and also retired British General Sir James Everard, who is the Honorary Chairman of the International Consultative Board of the new Strategy Centre, and also former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe. And we're also joined virtually by Senator Jeanne, who's the Senator for New Hampshire, and we're going to kick off the proceedings with a recorded message that she has sent to us from the United States. Please can you play the Senator's intervention?
Greetings and congratulations on holding this important forum today. I want to thank CEPA and the New Strategy Center for inviting me in my role as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee that oversees Europe and as co-chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group. The United States is proud to lead global support for Ukraine, and we are heartened by the significant contributions made by our NATO allies and our partners. I'm encouraged by the growing urgency among many allies to increase defense spending and contribute to our collective defense. As allies, we must do more for Ukraine and maintain transatlantic unity at every turn. This is particularly important because the war reflects a broader fight for our shared democratic values. We cannot give up on a Ukrainian victory because if Putin is successful in Ukraine, there is no telling where he'll stop. Together with our NATO allies, we've proven that the transatlantic bond is stronger than ever before. I am confident that the upcoming NATO summit will convey a message of unity and strength in support of Ukraine and our shared values. Finland's accession was a critical step to bolster the alliance. The United States continues to urge Turkey and Hungary to swiftly approve Sweden's entry to NATO. Our unity of purpose and determination to show Vladimir Putin that he cannot dictate a sovereign country's future is fundamental to our response. Putin's expansionist agenda has been clear in the Black Sea region, starting with Georgia in 2008 and continuing with its annexation of Crimea in 2014. I am proud to champion a bipartisan bill that would establish a U.S. interagency strategy on the Black Sea and strengthen support to our partners in the region. On a recent congressional delegation visit to Romania, I expressed my appreciation for Romania's considerable contributions to support Ukraine's military and humanitarian efforts. The United States appreciates Romania's support to NATO and welcomes its leadership to increase focus on the Black Sea region. And while we must not turn our attention from Ukraine, we must maintain vigilance against Putin's malign influence in Europe. The Western Balkans remain a fragile region. Although North Macedonia and Albania have been granted EU accession talks, some countries in the region continue to struggle economically and with democratic reforms. That's why I introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Wicker to further commit our administration to supporting this region. From the Balkans to the Black Sea, we must provide much needed support to fragile democracies and fight for our transatlantic values. We cannot take our eyes off our commitment. Ukraine is fighting for its future, but it's also fighting for the future of democracies around the globe. Thank you all.
Well, I think that frames our session very well. I'm a senior advisor at the Center for European Policy Analysis, based in Washington, D.C., although I'm actually in London. And for much of the last 20 years, we've been trying to explain to allies on both sides of the Atlantic and to decision makers how important cohesion is. And we've been grappling with the failures of our threat perception, even after the cyber attack on Estonia, the war in Georgia, which the Senator mentioned, and the initial phase of the Ukraine war in 2014. It was still difficult to get people to realize the kind of threat that we faced from Vladimir Putin's Russia, and also the growing threat we face from China. And if the Putin regime has done nothing else, it's solidified and underlined the importance of the transatlantic relationship. Nobody can doubt now how important it is that we have that United States commitment to European security that's penetrated all across the European continent. But the job's not done, and that's what we're here to talk about. There are still serious threats to our cohesion. We need to think about EU enlargement to the Western Balkans, and as well as to Ukraine and to Moldova, and we hope also to Georgia. We'll get onto that in the discussion. And we need to think about NATO enlargement and the Vilnius summit and what we can say on that. I'm going to turn first of all to Mr. CORLÂNĉEAN, because I know you've been engaged in another summit which is happening right now in Reykjavik, which is the Council of Europe summit. We sometimes forget about the Council of Europe, the custodian of the post-1991 settlement of the European Convention on Human Rights, Parliamentary Assembly, which still brings together more parliamentarians from more countries than pretty much anything else. But Mr. CORLÂNČEAN, tell us, what do you see as the challenges for cohesion? What are the lessons of the first year of the war, and what do we need to do next?
Well, yes, thank you so much for the introduction and also for the already addressed question. Well, looking some days ago on the title Standing by Ukraine, Cohesion of the Democratic World and the Challenges of a Year of War, and making now the connection with your question, I think I'm tempted to use as a base of my brief introductory remarks some keywords. And these keywords will be definitely, first of all, multilateralism. That means rules-based international society. It's an essential topic. Accountability and crime of aggression, and in relation with this, the establishment of an international criminal tribunal for judging the crime of aggression. And I will try to explain briefly why. Because beyond what happened so dramatically the Russian aggression against Ukraine and all these horrible crimes, destructions. Something else happened, and usually we are not discussing this type of distinguished gathering. We are looking more on the big issues of security, hard security, things like that. But in the same time, there is another dimension which is essential. This is the foundation. Because when Russia committed the aggression against Ukraine, it violated the foundation of our international society based on the UN Charter and based on the fundamental principles of international law. We are all the time invoking directly the territorial integrity, sovereignty, the obligation not to use force, or to the obligation to use the peaceful means for the peaceful settlements of the disputes. And this is not a simple issue. It's a fundamental issue, because Russia violated the foundation of our international society, which should remain committed to the rules and not to the use of force. And this generated a serious precedent, and it opened a Pandora box. This is why essentially we are obliged altogether, beyond the issue of Ukraine as such, we are obliged as an international community to solve the big issue of trying to be back to the functioning of an international society based on rules. And this is why we are obliged to find a legal solution based on political will to establish this international criminal tribunal for punishing the crime of aggression. Because when someone is opening a Pandora box, and if there is not an appropriate answer and reaction for the international community, you will see some other possible similar things happening in the future. So this is why the discussion that you have mentioned in the fourth summit of the Council of Europe, which is based on over 1 year of hard work in the Council of Europe, which is the oldest pan-European organization based in Strasbourg. And by the way, it's the only international organization that excluded Russia from its members last year because of this crime of aggression committed against Ukraine. And this is why this is, let's say, a key topic of our international efforts to try to determine the accountability at the level of the Russian state and its political and military leaders. Now, the history is saying something like that. The crime of aggression was already defined in 1933 through the London Convention for the definition of the aggression. And life is sometimes ironic. The first international law definition was proposed at that time by two foreign ministers. One was the Romanian foreign minister, which is famous Romanian diplomat, the most famous, Nicolae Titulescu, and paradoxically by the Soviet Commissioner for International Relations, Maxim Litvinov. They jointly proposed this definition in legal international terms of the crime of aggression. This was the basis, ladies and gentlemen, for condemning Russia on 3rd of March 2014 after the illegal annexation of Crimea. We have condemned at the level of EU foreign ministers at the time in Brussels, Russia for aggression committed against Ukraine. And by the way, it was my proposal in Brussels after 2 hours of complex discussions when it was not possible to reach an agreement or compromise at that time. So Russia was already condemned in 2014 for aggression committed against Ukraine. What was the follow-up? It was a poor follow-up, unfortunately. That declaration positively was the source of the sanctions, international sanctions established at least at the level of the European Union against Russia, but the level of the sanctions was quite poor in reality. And somehow we are paying the bill for the weaknesses of the European Union at that time. Now we are in a different situation, and this important political and legal battle to define the accountability and to establish a tribunal for judging the crime of aggression, I should say, will define the future of our international society. So this is why among the allies, among the partners, and I followed the fourth summit because I was among the contributors at the level of the Parliamentary Assembly that prepared somehow this summit to advance with the establishment. The wording adopted yesterday by the heads of states and government in Reykjavik under the Icelandic presidency of the Committee of Ministers is an appropriate one. It's a good one, but I still see some obstacles. For instance, there are different discussions how to establish. One of the elements that I raised in the Council of Europe during the past months is the following one. We have precedents. It's true at the national level, for instance, Belgium or Spain, where for really serious international crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and in this case, this is a supplementary proposal, crime of aggression, you can establish a universal jurisdiction. In these cases, for the national jurisdiction is the case of Belgium and Spain. Why we cannot think, if there are some other, let's say, difficulties, to move towards the establishment for a universal jurisdiction for the crime of aggression, for a tribunal, even when Russia is not part of the mechanism. When establishing a universal jurisdiction for a serious crime, you have the tools. So there are possibilities in legal and political terms. The only thing that I want to see is really the political will to advance to establish such a tribunal for judging the crime of aggression. And we already have some precedents that are helping this process, and this will be my final comment at this stage. The Council of Europe already did two important things. With modesty, last year we have adopted my report of the Parliamentary Assembly for on the MH17, the downing of the flight MH17. My report, beyond identifying the people guilty in charge for what they have committed from the Russian side there on the spot, is defining the responsibility of the Russian state for committing the downing of MH17. Supplementary, the European Court of Human Rights has its own role right now. 3 complaints against Russia from Netherlands, from Ukraine, and from a group of people, families, inter alia related to MH17 downing, in relation with the kidnapping of the Ukrainian children and for the illegal annexation of Crimea. These complaints were declared already a few months ago admissible by the European Court, and predictably there will be a final judgment that normally will establish also the responsibility of the Russian state for those elements that have been mentioned. This should be also a legal foundation for the just compensation mechanism. Yesterday in the summit it was discussed and it was launched a registry for the damages in the case of Ukraine for a future mechanism of just compensation. Things like those I have mentioned, beyond the military dimension and the things that have been raised related to the future NATO summit, are helping on our common purpose, which is related once again standing by Ukraine, cohesion of the democratic world, and once again our common effort to be back, not tomorrow, but maybe the day after tomorrow, to be back over to the international society based on rules and not based on abusing the military force against sovereign states. So this is essentially something that usually is not mentioned in this international conference. I wanted to add, and of course I'm available for any other questions also on some other topics related to this title. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. COLÂNșTEAN, for that. And I think this message of stick to our principles and enforce the rules, both when it comes to war crimes and to compensation and reparations, is an excellent way of framing our approach to Russia going forward. But I'm now going to turn to General Everard. Give us your thoughts on the lessons so far and the challenges we face.
Thank you, Robert. I don't think this is about a year at war or even 9 years at war, but success and failure over the duration and at the termination of this conflict. And the latter, failure, I don't think is an option unless Western decline in comparative terms becomes Western decay. The democratic world stands behind Ukraine because this is a war about establishing, protecting, identifying the rules, principles and values that will shape the 21st century. And Timothy Snyder told us, this is about the policies of mass death and the meaning of life in politics. It is about the sheer possibility of a democratic future, end of quote. In other words, it is a challenge, perhaps even our generational political challenge, to effectively defend the principle of sovereignty and the rule of law through our support across the diplomatic, information, military and economic, the DIME model for Ukraine. A country and a people at the point of the spear, and we should not forget this. We must do this, I think, while protecting the NATO centre of gravity, and this is clearly set out in the NATO military strategy as solidarity, unity and cohesion. And as an aside, as we look at the military instrument of power, it is absolutely true that the overall balance of resources and industrial capacity is decisively weighted towards the West, but only if we press, grow and surge. And I think we have been slow to do this. So this is about defending our vision, this is not about defending our vision of the world order, because I think a new bipolar order is already emerging and we shouldn't be frightened of that. But it is a fight, I think, for freedom and creating the conditions for democracy where democracy can flourish. And I think get it wrong and people around the world will learn which type of political system has more resilience, and this is the path they will follow. 4 brief points. One, I think that history is going to be unkind to the West. It will suggest that in our failure to confront Russia in 2014, by leaving Afghanistan in 2021, we encouraged through our apathy, our weakness, our indecision or our fed-upness, Putin to invade Ukraine. We grew tired of the forever wars, and even now Western politics, I think, is shaped by our experiences of Iraq and Afghanistan and the fear of prolonged engagement. But if we break faith with Ukraine this time, as I think President Putin and many non-Western commentators think that we will, then I think history will be even more unkinder to us, with our leaders, to quote R.J. Barker in his book Blood of Assassins, cursed to be the sum of their deeds. I mean, how long would it be before history repeated itself, and who would be next on the target list? Moldova, Georgia, perhaps even NATO allies. Second, I think if Russia is allowed to succeed in Ukraine, as I've said before, what message does this send to other states who then might see territorial conquest as a strategy for meeting their political objectives? Russia challenged the norms, we need to protect them. My third point, while we in the West might not be ready to die for Ukraine, I think we have no option but to willingly stand with and support Ukraine. The Foreign Affairs Journal spoke last month about the astonishing endurance of the West on Ukraine. I think this has surprised Russia, who believed that the liberal order was weak and weakening. And it's certainly true that liberalism didn't turn out to be the only doctrine post-Cold War, but it is still a good path and it needs protecting. And I think our leaders recognized in their collective outrage following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they moved. They moved to support Ukraine because this is where consensus took them. And there is strength in the herds. I mean, herds are strong, not weak. And I think, the herd is where it is, and it's going to be very difficult for the herd to move away from that position, unless Ukraine gives us a reason to do so, and I don't think they will. And last, I think, to steal from a recent CIS paper, military critics of Russia's performance need to start looking in the mirror. The alliance is not yet strong enough. Economic and military power are two sides of the same coin, and I hope when our leaders meet in Vilnius, they will show us that they do understand the dangers posed by Russia, and then they will be judged on the progress they have made to deliver the commitments that were set out in the NATO 2022 strategic concept. 11 pages, 67 we will commitments. And this included, you'll remember, a promise to defend every inch of aligned territory, with the plans and the military power so to do. And what do I think we'll uncover? I think we'll uncover we have made very good progress. We'll also uncover that we have not done enough. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for that. And you've put your finger on something that was nagging at me when I looked at the title of this panel, which was Cohesion of the Democratic World. Because if you look at the democratic world, meaning the big democracies, most of the democratic world is not inside NATO. It's countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, South Africa. And one of the striking things about these countries and the rest of the global south, as it's sometimes called, what we used to call the third world, is how lukewarm most of them have been on this conflict. I was in Tallinn the other day for the Lennart Meri conference, and one of the African delegates said with a touch of irony, well, we look at this conflict, it's just one lot of Europeans killing another lot of Europeans. They've been doing it for centuries and they'll continue to do it for decades, which is the sort of thing that sometimes Europeans have been heard to say about Africa. And so it's not seen as an anti-imperialist struggle which former colonies in the global south should instinctively should take the side of Ukraine. But we've also got problems with democratic cohesion closer to home with Turkey and Hungary, which just happen to be neighbours of Romania. So I wonder, Mr. CORLÂNștean, if I could ask you to look at democratic cohesion both close to home and further abroad. What do you see going wrong and what can we do about it?
Good question. Let me first start by putting in value, I think, the positive side, comparing the current situation with the previous situation in 2014. Definitely, for the second round, unfortunately, it was the second dramatic round, it was a much better situation. I do remember, without entering into details, that famous Foreign Affairs Council on 3rd of March 2014 in Brussels, when we had a long 2 hours discussion related to the first paragraph of the proposed conclusions by Cathy Ashton at that time and the External Service, how to stand after the illegal annexation of Crimea against Russia. And it was quite an amazing, unsuccessful exercise without any possibility to adopt a common stand at that time. It was based on the proposal that I have mentioned, having in mind the past history, that the proposal to condemn Russia, not to express serious concerns, not to express some other things, to condemn Russia for acts of aggression based on the London Convention of 1933, that we generated a consensus, surprising consensus. It was quite complicated, only on the first paragraph. What followed, the regime of the sanctions. Once again, we saw, and I saw, different nuanced positions of EU member states, depending on their specific economic interests in relation with Russia, in terms of trade, energy, supply, things like that. So the level of the sanctions was quite poor in the end, and we didn't reach the appropriate consequence and deterrence of Russia to continue to do wrong things. Now the situation honestly changed, and we saw really a much stronger cohesion among the EU partners and among the allies, and this was a really positive thing. The only problem is that the world is much bigger than our Euro-Atlantic family. And I think here somehow there was, and definitely there is, place for doing much more. I will give you a brief example. A few days ago we had in Reykjavik the Standing Committee of the Parliamentary Assembly, just one day before the summit, the Heads of States and Government Summit. And one of the topics was how to engage some other possible partners, it's true, of the Council of Europe. One of the topics was how to engage the Latin America countries. The keynote speaker was one of our Spanish colleagues for obvious reasons. There was an intervention, let's say, contradicting this proposition to enlarge the vision of engaging some other partners, possible partners of Europe, in political terms, even in democratic terms and so on, with a number of arguments. I was among that rejected that counter-arguments, supporting this type of vision, supporting the need to engage some other partners from outside our Western world. Because, for instance, next time when we might have a vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations, we need votes, by the way. We need countries to think like us, to have the same understanding of the need to be back of the multilateralism. So this is why, looking outside our Western family, we need to do much more things, maybe based on a division of labor, because our American friends can and should discuss very efficiently with some of the possible partners outside our Western European families, Euro-Atlantic family, but also the Nordic guys, the Germans, the British, the Latins, including Romania. We have our specific tools to discuss to specific partners. This is the outside dimension. The inside dimension on Turkey. Look, in Romania, we were looking all the time to Turkey, somehow different, comparing to some of our Western European allies, for different reasons. Turkey is a key player in this region. We are a country, a riparian country to the Black Sea, so we fully understand the role of Turkey. So we have our specific dialogue with Turkey, we have a strategic partnership, and all the time we are much in favor to accelerate the negotiations, EU chapters with Turkey, of course respecting the conditionalities and the criteria. For different other political reasons, the process was, let's say, frozen for a number of years. We didn't have the interest to see Turkey trying to find some other exits and connections with Iran, for instance, or with Syria a number of years ago. So we are in favor to try to define good things to promote and to facilitate the process of negotiation with Turkey. Of course, there are some requests, criteria, expectations in democratic terms. But if you are continuing to block a European process of negotiation, you should expect also to some other consequences and to some other redirections of the interests from Ankara. So things are complex. For instance, I can speak publicly that we had our dialogue with the Turkish partners and allies related to the need to continue the NATO enlargement process with Sweden. We had a fair discussion, and we have a fair discussion with our Turkish friends in supporting Sweden. So things like that should be privileged in a positive way.
And any thoughts on Hungary?
On Hungary, it's a much more complex situation. You know, it's a neighbor, first of all. There is this special historical, let's say, past history. There is an important ethnic Hungarian minority in Romania. There are different complex that should be positive. Not all the time it's possible. So I will continue to engage Hungary.
Super. I just have one question for you, Sir James, then we're going to go to the floor. You must look at NATO now with a degree of envy because the level of focus and commitment that the alliance now has and the ability to have these regional defence plans and instruct countries to get stuff ready and do their job. It's night and day compared with the sort of phony promises and overlapping commitments of a few years ago. Do you sometimes wish you could get your hands on the controls again?
No, I think, well, just to answer one, on the question of where nations sit in relation to Ukraine, I think it's a well-known political strategy to sit on the fence, with both ears to the ground. And I don't think we should be surprised that many nations are keeping a distance from this war because it seems a long way away and they don't want to take sides. So I'm a realist that doesn't surprise me. I think the important thing about NATO's journey is it started under General Breedlove, who's here. General Scaparotti took on the baton, told Walters, finished it off. The alliance didn't recognise Russia as a threat until 2019 formally, but the plans to respond, to provide a AOR strategic plan for the defence of the Euro-Atlantic area have been in development now for 3 or 4 years. And they're not yet complete. You know, it'll be another SACEUR probably until this thing is put to bed. So I think we've been on a journey. I enjoy playing my part in it, and we've got the next DSACEUR in the audience. You know, he'll enjoy his part too.
Thanks very much. I have to say, I find it astonishing that it's taken so long. I was at the Strasbourg Kale Summit for NATO, which was the first time that they began to think they might need some contingency plans. That was at the instigation of President Obama, I think. And the East Europeans, and particularly the Poles, the Balts, the Czechs and the Romanians had been warning since the 1990s that things are going in the wrong direction in Russia, and they were systematically patronized, belittled and ignored and told to shut up about this if you want to join NATO. And I'm still waiting. I think the historians may be quite unkind on that. But there was a question over there. Sir, you had your hand up. I think there's a microphone coming to you. Yes, you've got it already. Please, could you introduce yourself?
My name is Andreas Iofanous. I come from Nicosia, the Republic of Cyprus. And since I heard about Turkey and aggression, it comes to my mind that Turkey has been occupying almost 40% of the territory of Cyprus since 1974.
Speak into the microphone, sir.
Yes, has been occupying 40% of the Republic of Cyprus in 1974, and we do not have the same sensitivities. And in addition to that, I would say that Turkey has been tolerated, and pressures to accommodate Turkey were towards the weaker side, the Republic of Cyprus.
To a question, if you would, sir.
I asked that question.
Yeah.
What comments on that?
Okay, very good.
Because in relation to international law and stability,
Yep.
we have to be consistent and not apply double standards.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. We have 8 minutes to include the answer as well. There's a gentleman there. Can you just pass the microphone forward?
Yes, thank you. My name is Igor Prokopchuk. I'm ambassador of Ukraine here in Bucharest. Ukrainian foreign minister was announced on the program for this session, and unfortunately he was not able to deliver for this recording. So I want to apologize, and if you allow me, I would like to make a few comments from a Ukrainian perspective on the topic discussed in this session. Starting with Ukraine, I want to thank Senator CORLÂNĉEAN for placing a focus on the area of justice and responsibility for the Russian aggression, and we have witnessed some progress even in the last few months. First, in relation to this international arrest warrant issued by the ICC. So by now, Vladimir Putin is an indicted war criminal. We have also seen the summit that was convened by Ukraine, the Bucha summit, relating to responsibility, and only a few days ago, a summit on establishment of the international tribunal relating to the crime of aggression. So it's very good that we have a very, very broad understanding with international partners in terms of making sure that the responsibility for the crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine is established. Few comments that I would like particularly to focus areas from my side. First, this very brutal war continues. And in fact, it was again last night that the Russians launched a very massive and intensive missile attack on different Ukrainian cities. And this is the 8th such attack from the beginning of May. These are very complex attacks where the Russians are using different types of missiles launched from the land, sea and the air. And they also extensively use attack drones, kamikaze drones, to exhaust the Ukrainian air defense systems. So the question, the military question, the question of the military capabilities remains a top priority for Ukraine as this war continues. And this was the focus of the visits of President Zelensky in the last few days to the capitals in Europe, to Rome, Berlin, Paris, and London. The top priority that we have is strengthening air defense capabilities of Ukraine. For now, we have seen in these last attacks that the capabilities have improved significantly. They show a very high effectiveness, and yet the number of missiles available to the Russian forces, including the missiles of the Soviet type, they continue to present very significant challenge. How we see that we can cope with that? It is again by receiving additional air defense capabilities, and it is by receiving the aircraft capability. So the focus for us now is formation of an aircraft coalition, the coalition of countries willing to present F-16 aircraft capability to Ukraine. For us it is of paramount importance that these are modern Western aircraft that will have a technological superiority over the aircraft used by the Russians. I would also place a focus on the issues relating to the sanctions. It is absolutely necessary to continue to remove the loopholes existing now in terms of circumvention of the sanctions introduced so far, and also stepping up the sanctions pressure. The questions relating to financial and economic assistance to Ukraine, including in terms of developing the strategy of reconstruction. One emphasis I would also like to make would relate to the upcoming NATO summit. There are big expectations from Ukraine in relation to the decisions that would need to be taken at this summit. We are meeting now in Bucharest, where 15 years ago a decision was taken that Ukraine, together with Georgia, will become NATO member states. Since that time, we have not seen progress, real, meaningful progress, on the path of Ukraine's accession to the alliance. Now we think that at this juncture, it is absolutely necessary that such decision is taken. Clearly, Ukraine will not be a NATO member state before the war continues. Clearly, we will need to re-establish the sovereignty and control over the entire territories of Ukraine, but we are also confident that it is possible to offer a solution to Ukraine, an algorithm with clear timelines that will lead to Ukraine's membership with the alliance. In our review, it will be a very significant contribution to strengthening the security, not diminishing it. We need to make very clear to the Russians that the territory of Ukraine is not a contested territory. It is fully anchored with the West, with the Western institutions, be it the European Union or NATO. As far as the EU is concerned, the decisions were taken last year on granting the candidate status to Ukraine, again, with some benchmarks to be reached by Ukraine. The same could be done in relations with NATO, identifying the benchmarks which would lead the way for Ukraine's integration.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for filling in for your Foreign Minister. And I'd just like to say, as someone who's followed the Romanian-Ukrainian relationship since 1991, it's astonishing to see this atmosphere and practical examples of solidarity and trust and cohesion in a relationship that hasn't, over the last 30 years, hasn't always been easy. It's something we should really celebrate. If anyone has a two-finger intervention, I will take it now. There's a gentleman there. Just literally, sir, you have about 20 seconds. Then I'm going to come back to the panel for final remarks. That you and the microphone are heading towards each other.
Thank you. Question mainly to General Everard, I think. Two questions.
No, you're allowed
one 15
second.
Delay, they're quick.
Can you explain who you are, please?
I'm James Scare, Professor in Department of War Studies, King's College London.
Super.
Number one, I have no doubt that democratic countries will be cohesive and continue to support. I only have one doubt. Has anybody dared to think about the prospect of a second Trump term and what that will do? And logistics of the lifeblood of warfare. The European Parliament just voted 500 million euros for ammunition production. That's going to take time to come through. Personally, nowhere near enough. Do you think that can be sustained and supported?
Thank you very much. You've got a minute to answer that, Sir James.
I think there are a number of questions. First of all, on President Trump, I mean, I don't know how that will unfold. My experience as DSACEUR was when President Trump was, talking down NATO, American support to Europe almost doubled. So what he said and what happened weren't necessarily the same thing. So we'll see. I think logistics sits in the same area as missile defense. I mean, NATO has a number of major shortfall areas, they're called, which really stem from the end of the Cold War when Europe disinvested in all the capabilities you needed for collective defense. We haven't closed those gaps out. This is why it is so difficult to give Ukraine these systems, because we don't have them. And it comes back to my point about pressing the button. America, you remember, built 10,000 bombers in 21 months in the Second World War. I mean, where's that attitude?
Thank you.
Very quickly on Cyprus. I mean, Cyprus, I agree, it's been going on for far too long. It is a Voldemort issue. You probably don't watch Harry Potter, but you can't talk about Voldemort, Harry Potter, and it is a block. There's so many things that people need to do, but it's not talked about. It's parked in the political space. And I commanded a battalion in the UN, and this was a big moment. It was going to be resolved back in 2000, and it wasn't. So it needs more focus, I agree with you.
And it is tragic. We came so close to a solution at the last minute for very short-term political reasons. The EU flinched, and I think we missed the moment. Final word to you, Mr. CORLÂNĉEAN, on anything that's been said so far, or if you just want to tell us where you think we'll be this time next year.
Well, we have a saying in Romania, but it's difficult to translate, sort of mafalda. I'm not here to predict. The only hope is that our strength, common strength and determination will determine the conditions that will be supportive for Ukraine to be in a good place at the appropriate moment when the final solution respecting the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the interests of a sovereign state. And also looking for the day after, because we had the discussion, by the way, in the Council of Europe, Russia will not disappear after the war of aggression against Ukraine from Europe. So it's a process, and we should continue to stay together in a very cohesion and determined way if we want to obtain results.
Well, thanks so much. There's a huge amount of expertise in the audience, and I'm sorry that we had such an abbreviated session. We could have gone on for hours, maybe days, but these issues won't go away. And for now, please would you join me in thanking both remotely the Senator and the Ukrainian Foreign Minister and his representative here for so ably filling the gap, and for our two physical panelists for their contributions.